representing the audience will be Dr. Anand Deshpande, Chairman, Managing Director of Persistent Systems, who would be taking stage and asking questions on our behalf. Anand, over to you. Yes, thank you.
So it's a pleasure to welcome you, Vishy, to Persistent Systems, and thank you for coming to Pune as well. I was at the event in the morning, and it was really good to see a large number of very young, aspiring, and enthusiastic kids who were learning from you. So I hope they had a good day today, and hopefully we are looking at future champions there as well. So thanks for not only being the champion, but also making the next round of champions. I'd like to thank Abhijit Kunte for making this event happen. He is our local grandmaster here, and without him, this event would not have been possible. So thank you, Abhijit, for doing this. So I want to start with a tweet that actually you put out a few days back, which says that what you learn from a GM is not theory, but theory that appears on a chessboard. It is not what you learn, but when you should use it. And then you said mentorship sessions about handling emotions and energy was your tweet, and I think we're going to sort of take off from that and sort of try to use this opportunity to bring business, personal life into chess and how chess relates to some of these kinds of things and keep it a little bit more conversational. My plan is to chat for about 35 to 40 minutes and then open the floor for questions, for any questions that you might have. All right. So in terms of the business as such that we are all part of, or what I find is that typically when people are running a business, one of the big things that makes successful businesses is having a bold, big dream. So you have to have a dream and you have to keep working on it. The second big point that we see a lot around is positioning and focus. How do you position your business and then how you stay focused on it rather than going here and there. Teamwork is really important in a business context, having the right team leadership around that, and also putting the need for mentors. And decision making finally becomes a critical aspect of what you're doing. And then finally, as we are sitting in a persistent auditorium, persistence is really what makes a successful business. So this context, I'm going to sort of open it out one by one and get Vishy's opinions on how he has lived his chess life using some of these ideas and what he thinks about, how it relates. So let's start with your, clearly, you've always had a dream to be a chess player. When did that dream become grandmaster, to be a grandmaster, and when did it become to be the world champion? And how did you kind of mold your dream all the way through? Can you share some of your thoughts on how this all happened, and how can young people be dreaming big, and what did you tell them in the morning?
Well, I remember when I started playing chess, I was 6 when I learned how to play from my mother. And then very soon my parents noticed that I was spending way more time with chess than they expected. So they found a chess club nearby. And we're talking 40 years back, so there was no way you could look up a chess club or search for it on your phone. You simply happened to stumble onto it. But it turned out my sister studied, her college was right opposite this chess club. So she passed by it one day and she said, well, let's put him there. I went to this chess club and I started playing. Now, if you had asked me then what my goal was, I would have said world champion. Wow. and I know this for a fact because I've spoken to people then and they said, yes, that's what you said. Which is slightly embarrassing now because I'm pretty sure then I had no idea what was involved. So this is almost like I want to go to the moon or something. You don't think through what you're saying, you just say it. But in a way, this innocence is nice because it also it doesn't leave room for any doubt. You're just sure that it'll happen. It's just a question of details. When I became an international master, then the grandmaster title was in front.
Okay.
And so then it became a bit more real. But by this time I had some appreciation for what was involved and that was difficult. In a way, many of these titles are just psychological barriers. You think they're almost impossible, then somebody either someone in your country or in your circle, someone like that does it. And then you think, wait, that's possible. And suddenly it becomes easier with the second and third. But at that point, the Grandmaster title was a big psychological barrier. I started trying for it in about 86. And I went through all these tournaments where you could make a Grandmaster result. You needed 2 or 3 results totaling 24 games in total. So anyway, some details, and there are other details about ratings and so on. But my first tournament was in Calcutta, and in my very first attempt at trying to become a Grandmaster, I became, I fell short of the norm by half a point. And so I got the impression that I was much closer than I really was. Then in the second tournament, I missed by 1 point, and after that it was a bit haywire for a while. But what was clear was that every single tournament I missed by half or 1, a bad result would be a bit more. And then I began to realize just how difficult this was. Then you have a sense for that it's actually not something that's going to fall into your lap. I spoke to an arbiter then, after another near miss, and he told me, at some point you'll just overshoot the norm without even trying, and it just happens. Don't worry. And this is in fact what happened. So I suddenly had to forget about the Grandmaster title for a while. I was playing the World Junior. Unexpectedly for me, I won it. By that I mean there were 2 players higher rated than me in that tournament, then Ivanchuk and Sokolov. And both of them, I simply didn't even think that I could win. I'd come off a very bad result as well. But I just played chess. Suddenly after 7 rounds I found myself in the lead. And it was just very smooth, and I was World Junior champion. And that suddenly gave me a lot of confidence. I went to a tournament, again missed by the same half point. And then finally I had 2 tournaments in a row to wrap up the year. Both were happening in India, coincidentally in Delhi and Coimbatore. And both tournaments, exactly like he said, I made the norm quite easily. So and this I've noticed with many of the goals that I had in my life. That if you stop obsessing about the goal and you simply concentrate on getting better, the goal is very helpful in the sense that it gives you a target in every tournament. But you can't be clever about it. By this I mean that if, for instance, you say, I want to have a certain rating at the end of this year. Now, if you've gotten to that rating in July, and the next, all your thoughts are, if I can skip this tournament, then my rating will stay at this number, and if I skip this, and if I do this, and if I do that, and I only play against this weak player, that is the wrong way to do it. You simply have to keep playing, work on getting better. So, in this case, I focused on just playing, getting better, and the GM title literally, I crossed very easily. It turned out to be no barrier at all. So that sense, and that has repeated itself very often. It happened again with the candidates. It just happened. I went to the interzonal, and the very first interzonal I qualified. Then I went very far in the candidates. And I think the only title that really took me a very long time to get was the World Championship. And that's, let's say, an order of magnitude bigger, because you have to be firing on so many cylinders at the same time. It's not quite the same thing as all the other titles. But mostly, I feel that as long as I was enjoying chess, I was motivated to learn, and I was enjoying the journey, many things just fell into place on their own and didn't require some sort of special effort.
That's quite good to know. And so would you say that you've been evolving your goalposts as you go along? So now that you've been world champion 5 times, do you always feel like there is more to achieve, or you feel like, okay, now I'm happy, I keep moving? Or how do you keep pushing yourselves, having done it so many times?
For instance, right after I became a Grandmaster, I went through a slump of about 6 months. And this is what I meant, that suddenly when I got to a tournament, I didn't have to make a grandmaster result, which suddenly meant that there was no specific target for me which I had to attain, and I found this very disorienting. So suddenly I was off the pace in many places. It happened to me once again after I won my first world title. And this is something that repeats itself once in a while. So I found it very helpful to reframe your goals rather than always set new ones. But you can, your mileage can vary. Everyone will find something that chimes in with them. In 2001, I had a really bad result, about 6 months after I had become world champion. And the first 6 months I actually had quite good results, but the quality of my chess was suffering. So in a sense, I wasn't efficient and clinical as before. A lot of slip-ups were happening, but in the end everything would work out and I would say, well, it's fine. I mean, there's a little problem, but I didn't show any urgency to fix it. Then I went through a really disastrous result, and after that I felt that, or I tried to do it consciously. And maybe this was the first time that I was trying to do something like this consciously. Before, I just could get better at something else, but now, once you become world champion, there are not that many low-hanging fruit left. So one of the things I found very helpful was the idea of learning things and experimenting while I'm successful. Mm-hmm. So not to wait for a failure before you motivate yourself to do that, but to try to do it while you're successful itself. I mean, there's a tendency to stick with what works, correct, but everything has an expiry date. In a way that I cannot explain, an expiry date just comes. Even an approach that's very successful, maybe people get used to it, maybe it stops being effective, I don't know what happens, but so I found that consciously experimenting a bit more, taking a bit more risk was very helpful. But often when I attained a big goal, I found it very nice when my next goal was not some particular title, but just to do new things in chess. I found it very helpful to say, well, I'm going to play a new opening, or I'm going to change my style a little bit. And to alternate between this sort of goal-oriented and fun-oriented way of having new things to look forward to.
I think this is very important. I think what you just said about how you experiment when you are successful, I think is something that I think we can all learn from, because we tend to accept the fact that it has worked, so let's keep doing the same thing. Why change? And the expiry date comment also, especially in the tech industry where, despite whatever you might do, the ground under us is always shifting, so it's very easy to get complacent. So I think this is a good lesson from what you mentioned here. In terms of positioning, so in the software or in the tech industry, you have to sort of position yourselves in the right spot and be prepared for, doing what is, so you don't try to do too many things typically. You say, okay, if I'm a business of a particular kind, I stay within there. So in chess as well, on your training and while you are training through it, how do you stay focused about, doing certain activities, and you have written a lot and talked about this a lot in many of your interviews as well, as to how you sort of avoid distractions, or how you manage distractions, and how you stay really true to, what goal is, and all of those kinds of things. So can you comment a bit on that?
It's more of a struggle than I let on, usually. So when I say avoid distractions, sometimes I find it's helpful to give in to them as well. So there's a mix, but anyway, just keep that in mind when I give my answer. One of the things that's happened in chess, and which is impossible to ignore when you look back at the history of chess, is the evolution of computers. So around about 1987, the first chess database appeared. This was a glorified library, let's say a very effective indexed library. But already a generation of chess players who were used to referring things in books found it very hard to adjust, and there was a kind of disruption for them. And the rankings changed. People who were strong in the whole thing already suffered a little bit. But the real changes started to come when engines came in. So these are chess playing programs that could simply sit on your PC and play very well. To compare their effects, I would say the first generation of chess playing programs were like calculators. You took the problem and then you conceptualized the solution, and then you checked it with the calculator to make sure you didn't make some elementary arithmetical mistake. And that was what computers were good for once upon a time. Then as they got stronger, they became a bit like, I don't know, torchlights. You took them into an area, and just when it starts to get dark, you switch them on and they take you a bit further, and you can... and then once the best computers in the world could beat the best chess players, and as that process evolved, so then even a very good PC would consistently beat the best chess players in the world. Then what you had was, at first, a beginning of a combination of the two roles, but then essentially chess engines became like oracles. They just gave you an answer, but they didn't tell you they couldn't explain anything. So if your learning didn't evolve, then very quickly you hit a wall. In the first era, and also before computers, if I had to learn, let's say, a new opening or a new skill on the chessboard, I would need to find all the material myself. I would need a mentor. A mentor could speed things up by telling me, this is important, don't waste your time, it's a dead end thing. It could cut the working time you needed very fast. But you simply needed a certain amount of time to form your own impressions and get to learn something. Then you needed to get familiar with the position so that the tactical details were smoother every time. As you got familiar, it's like speaking a new language. As you speak it more and more often, the words pop up faster, you get better at the idioms, you understand what, and so on. So it improves and you get faster and faster. And that's what it took to learn a new thing in chess. So as long as, in that stage, I found that my intuition was extremely helpful. And if I had worked on some area if I specialized in one area, then that area was very safe for me for a very long time. It took someone a long time to catch up. Very similar to what you would call a barrier to entry. So, but once computers became like oracles, I could take any position, even one that I was totally unfamiliar in. A mentor is still helpful because they can still save you a lot of time by telling you what's relevant and what isn't. But a lot of the other things could be skipped and the whole process sped up. So someone could catch up in understanding because they can use the computer to map out all the correct responses, or as many of the correct responses. They can have a lot of doubts answered by simply posing them to the computer. And this meant that you could no longer specialize in something. I felt that, especially the period when I was playing a lot of the World Championship matches, I found it very difficult to cope with tournaments afterwards. Because, after 4 months with your team, everyone is sick of each other. So, we don't admit it, but everyone's happy not to see the other guy for a few months and so on. So, I wasn't able to work a lot with my team and so on. And my team was very good in helping me. First of all, they were very good at a lot of the stuff that I was not good at. And I was used to them giving me everything in very good summaries, tell me just what to do, and speeding it up. Without them, I found it very hard to adjust to tournaments where I had to do a lot of the work, especially because of these changes, that no longer could I specialize in something. You would often have to learn something new every day. This problem peaked from 2011 to 2013. There were traits before, but it peaked then, and for those 2 years, I remember hardly winning any games. So, to give you one statistic, this period is bookended by 2 tournaments. So the Tata Steel event in 2011 and then the same event in 2013. I won 4 games in each of these tournaments. And in the entire period of 2 years in between, I won only 4 games. So I was really having difficulty winning any games because people were doing new stuff. And I was just I found it very hard to cope. And it seems that what I mentioned earlier, this experimenting and so on, it's very nice to say that, but you have to constantly find new ways of doing even these things. So I was trying to experiment, but I didn't seem to know how to experiment because the context had changed. Then after 2000,
Was that bothering you, the fact that you were not winning games? And
it was annoying me a lot, and I was getting more and more frustrated. But so I was working hard and all that, but sometimes I feel that unless you identify the problem and identify the right way of working hard is just tiring yourself.
true.
If so, funnily enough, as information becomes easier and knowledge becomes easier to acquire, a mentor becomes more and more useful. Someone who can cut the time you need and point you straight to the relevant areas becomes more useful. But every time I would get back with my team and we'd work for 3 months together, then I would catch up again because they were filling in a lot of the gaps in my approach. So it's very important to have people who can help you, and especially people who are good at things that you're not good at. And I was really dependent on my team in those days. So for the matches, I was able to cope well, but for everything else, I fumbled it. And there are some clear mistakes I made because I should have seen it as more of an emergency than I realized then. I always seem to think that as I went along, I would figure it out, but it's not that easy. So, and starting right after the match that I lost, I would say the most important thing I did then, and ironically one of my biggest successes after that, came in a tournament where not only did I not change a single thing, but I didn't even work. So I was so disappointed by losing that match that I didn't look at chess for a couple of months, or I looked at the bare minimum needed. But somehow, after 2 months of not looking at chess, your brain is fresh again. You can't explain it. Things just went like a dream. I can't say that I'm going to repeat that approach every time, but I was surprised how well it went. So I'm talking of the candidates tournament in 2014. But after that, I started to work more and more with my current second Polish player, because he has an extreme way of viewing things that is very different from mine. So I find it very helpful to do that. And the other thing is simply, I was playing a lot more tournaments, and as a result, I was networking more. And by networking, I mean that you meet all the 10 participants of a tournament. You go out to dinner each night with a different one of them. And while you're chatting, they say, oh, did you see this game? This thing happened. And you get so much intelligence like this, things that I wouldn't have noticed on my own.
But when you go for dinner, you talk chess?
Honestly, not a lot, but if there was some interesting game that day or some story, of course it would get mentioned. Of course, most of it is gossip, but even that was nice. It tells you what people are up to, and I say that because I think it's very important to be networked or to have lots of people who point you to things, because in the end, when a lot of people can point out so many things that you might have missed. It's very similar to news. I mean, in chess also we are flooded with news, and you may not notice what's important, but and if you chat with people who can each point you in a different direction, you catch up well. So after that, in general, I would say that I've stabilized. I'm able to, at least I know what's going on, and what are the changes that are happening and things like that. I'm much better at this than before when I was closeted in the world title, and that has been very helpful. So it's very important to have people who you work with who are constantly contradicting you, because because their way of viewing things is different, because it forces you to question all your assumptions again and again and again. But also just being interested in many different things, even things that I'm not going to play, knowing that something is happening is useful intelligence to have. So, after I'm using it in the kind of military context of intelligence, but you know what I mean. So,
Yes. So one of the things, of course, is quite well known and has been well written about is how you had all the Russian players and Kasparov and others who have kind of helped you through your process, and some of the senior guys as well. And in your championship preparation, they, I guess, gave you tips, or at least that's what the newspapers said a lot about. And typically those people have not known to be very friendly with other people as such. So you seem to have had a good knack of getting, help, support from a wider community, and your networking abilities that you talked about seem to have
I think
been
that's
really-
too strong. It's based on one match. So I'll explain a little bit of the background. I was playing Vasily Topalov. And let's say him and even more his manager, very polarizing figures. And they would often end up alienating a lot of people. And I generally tended to get along with everyone. And if I don't get along with everyone, I prefer to avoid seeing them rather than to fight with them, spar with them. So, what happened was I was playing, I was going to play Topalov for the match in Bulgaria. And I suddenly got a phone call from, through an intermediary from Kasparov saying, would you like to consult me, if you want to consult me on something. Honestly, first of all, I didn't feel that he could give me that much help that casually, and I didn't think he was going to spend a lot of time on this thing. So we spoke a little bit. I mentioned some of my plans for the match, and we left it at that. Then during the match, we consulted him a couple of things. He had already done this also for the Kramnik match, by the way, because he has a little axe to grind. So there's a bit of that as well. And then during the match, let's say there were two big reasons. One was Topalov and Kramnik were no longer on speaking terms. That was the big reason. And I mean, they really detested each other. They were refusing to shake hands and things like that. And the minor reason was that I decided to copy Kramnik's approach for the match with Topalov. So with this memorable conversation, Kramnik called me and said, I'm very touched that you're trying to play like me, but you're doing it very badly. Can I help you? And he's got this dry humor. So anyway, I said, well, come on, is that a question? So he said, but he was the only one who really went flat out. So to give you an idea, I had like a couple of phone calls with Gary, then or Skype calls, and then Kramnik would actually he would connect with my team, and he would work for like 5 hours every night with them.
Wow.
I think there might have been varying motivations. He might have enjoyed the thing, and certainly whatever his reasons, I'm infinitely grateful to him. And somehow after our match in Bonn, we both started to like each other very much again. I mean that before that, there was always an undercurrent of rivalry which held back. So we were friendly, but not that much so. But after that, we both became fathers a few months, within a year of each other and things like that. So we started to suddenly look at each other like veterans. Yeah. So different. But he called, he was very helpful and all that. And on top of that, at that point, Carlson was coming over to do some sparring sessions for 3 days at a time. He had done that for Mexico and for Bonn, and he came a third time for Bulgaria. Again, much appreciated, but I think there was simply this connection of my trainer who was Danish, and he was working with both of us. And his thing was, look, this is mutually beneficial. You get some insight into this, and do you want to? So kind of meeting of the minds. It has never happened again at that scale. I have received help from people and things like that, but I think my reputation probably exceeds reality a bit there.
But have you been doing the same with other people as well?
No. I generally feel quite uncomfortable getting in with, or I had the feeling that if someone asked me, I would definitely consider helping them, casually. Let's put it this way, I knew enough about what my seconds went through to understand that I never wanted to be one. I mean, I saw how exhausted they were, and I couldn't imagine that I'd ever do that for someone else. But I was probably open to the idea if someone had asked me. So if Carlson or Caruana or Karyakin had posed the question, there's a probability I might have agreed. There's a possibility I might have said no as well. It depends what was involved. But none of them ever called, and that kind of put that matter to rest.
Maybe they're watching.
No, now the answer is no. Akhil is not going to let me go off like that for fun.
No, so actually I want to take you to decision making. So when you're on a board, you're making decisions right at the spur of moment. And some of these games, especially the ones you've been playing, they last for a long time. You ponder through every decision, every move. While you probably know the move you're going to make, you think through it for a while and a long time. How do you translate your months of work to those few, say hours, but actually few minutes of when you want to make that decision? And how do you kind of live with decisions that you know may have not been right?
Okay. So there's always two sides. One is the objective side, where you look at a position and you say, this is what the position is evaluated as, and therefore this is the logical thing I would do. This is almost like, this is what anybody else should do in my situation. A very neutral sounding thing. But this is actually the healthiest approach, is the way to play chess. Of course, we are a human being, so when we sit opposite someone, whether we like them, whether we dislike them, whether we have good opinion of them, whether we have a low opinion of them, all these factors come in. And they influence you to some degree. By this I mean that sometimes player A will have a very bad score with player B. And so when over time player A will be afraid of playing. And then what he might do is he might try to overcompensate somewhere. He'll come to the board and say, I usually back down at this moment, so today I'm going to force myself to be courageous. But and then he will make a courageous move at exactly the moment that he shouldn't. To give you an example. So the best thing is always the most courageous thing is to always make the objective move.
Yeah,
I can put it that way. So this means that if the position calls for me to make a passive move, I should do exactly what B would do against me, because let's assume that he's not afraid of me. Would he play the passive move? Well, you should do what's called for in the position. But there's always this conflict. On the one hand, you want to play the best moves, but on the other hand, you really want to win. And in chess, you don't win because you make the best moves. You win because your opponent makes the last mistake. So if you bear that in mind, then whatever causes that mistake is a good move, but you have to wander carefully. You start taking risks because you think that's unfavorable for your opponent, and they could surprise you. Maybe they've improved in that area, maybe that moment they're particularly sharp. Things can go wrong as well. So there's always this conflict between objectivity and I find that even if you're not able to be objective the whole time, it's very nice to be able to break the game into chunks. So you mentioned disappointment, I'll tell you. So sometimes you'll be winning after move 20. Things have gone really well. And then you can almost feel it in your body. So happy because you expected a tough game where you'd still be plodding along on move 25, and here after move 20 you're winning and you're very happy. Then on move 25, and often you'll tell yourself, no, I must be really careful, and you really try to be careful, and then you make a blunder.
Mm-hmm.
And 3 moves later your advantage disappeared, or even worse, and now you're kicking yourself the whole time. So this kind of chain of events can happen. The reverse can happen as well, same. It's important to be able to put the past behind, because you're not going to play those parts of the game again, and always play the position you have in front of you. So in the first example, if I have turned a winning position into a lost one, now I must try to draw it.
Mm-hmm.
I should forget about kicking myself, that I can do later. Focus on drawing. So that means you have to reframe the objectives. And this is very hard to do over the board. I find it helpful, especially if we made a time control and now we get an extra bit of time, to go into the players area, make myself a coffee, sit down there for a few minutes, calm down, come back, and you have accepted this new reality, and then you start to deal with that. I also will become very fatalistic. I'll just say, well, this game is lost. I don't care. Now I'm simply going to at least make him work a bit more.
Wait for him to make a mistake.
No, not even that. It's just I'm going to. He already. The guy was already so lucky. He doesn't deserve this. At least let him solve 3 more problems before he wins. Whatever. And if you do that, it's very healthy because you suddenly make the moves that offer the most resistance, offer him the most chance to go wrong, and sometimes he will. The reverse is slightly harder, and I still find it difficult to do. Where if I've been lost the whole game, and then suddenly at the end of that, my opponent messes up, and suddenly I'm better now. I find it much harder because with my relief, it's no longer possible for me to sit and try to be better. Now, if I'm winning, I will probably win it. But if I'm only slightly better, I often find that my relief overwhelms my other emotions, and I'm no longer able to play the game objectively. So very often in those games, even if I'm better after this turn of events, I will make a draw. But in every case, it's good to try to break your thoughts and come back, calm yourself, and find this balance again. If you can do that, there are players who do it naturally. I remember Karpov in his best days was supposed to be someone who simply could put back. Well, he was called cold-blooded for not called cold-blooded for nothing. But he was very good at that, and I over time I've obviously learned to appreciate that a lot. There are other players who never get over their emotions, and you can really see that as well. But you're always striving for objectivity. You need to be aware of your emotions, and the second thing is, if nothing else, you should at least know what usually happens to you. So I know that when I'm still wound up from the previous events, it'll go badly, but I'll keep telling myself again and again. This is a good moment to stop and think. But sometimes you're too nervous to do it. But still, if you keep on telling yourself, it'll slow you down just enough to save you a half point here or there. That's usually the struggle that I wrestle with. Then working backwards, it's also very helpful to try and simulate, if you like, these positions at home. So you take the last 10 or 15 games where you were unable to cope. And at home, you sit with an opponent. You can sit with your computer or with your trainer with the computer, and you can try to play that at home and imagine your emotions. It comes back very easily. You see the positions that you lost, all the bad emotions come back. But now you know that you're a bit freer to experiment because you understand it's not a real game. The computer isn't going to smirk at you afterwards. So you'll somehow, and like this, you can also train yourself a bit to the next time you're on the board, you might cope a bit better. So these are skills that can be worked at, but you also need to be very aware of what goes wrong and what goes wrong emotionally.
You seem to know all the games you've played. You seem to remember most of the games that you've played, or at least all the more important ones. You seem to have a
But just like most memories in life, I would say that I remember the games that were painful or were euphoric. The average game, I'll have to look it up a couple of times before so there are many games that I've forgotten, but the intense ones, of course, you never forget.
So now going back to this whole, you started off with the computer and how computers have evolved. Clearly, when you talked about the early ones, they were like the calculators. Then you had the 96, 97 IBM games, where they were essentially using brute force to go after it. And more recently now with AlphaZero and other Google games, they have really evolved to being more machine learning and different kind of neural networks or deep learning and things like that. Do you see an effect in terms of how the games are being played because of these changes and algorithms on the computers, or as far as the board is concerned, they feel the same? And do you see a change in the way these games are being approached by computers today? I know there's more power, But other than that, you see a fundamental difference in the way the game is being played?
Yes, the game has evolved. I would say it's just reinvented itself over the last 2 decades, because the way we do things, the attitude of players to concepts, everything has evolved. First of all, now most chess players expect to be wrong, that they have made many mistakes during the game. 30 years ago, you might have been much more confident that you played a great game. Now you think, well, it's just a matter of time till I get home and then the computer shows me all the mistakes I made. So first, there's a certain humility. Second thing is, I think there are no areas to specialize in anymore. People don't sit and just say, well, I'm good at this and I'm not good at this. You have to learn everything because even in what you're good at, there's new stuff to learn. There's stuff to unlearn. So that's changed. So that's changed completely. And I think also your learning attitude has to change. Nothing makes me unique as a chess player anymore in some sense, because in all areas, the computer is better at what we do. But so your learning method nowadays is not about finding the answers. It's about asking the right questions. So if you have a computer in front of you, I think the most interesting thing is to keep on thinking of new questions and asking them, and then trying to understand the answers, because the answers will just be the tip of the iceberg. What you need to do is really delve into the answers, understand all the bits that go into it, and if you can figure that out, then I mean, literally every evening you can have a feeling, wow, I learned something really new today that I did not know before. And because of this increasing depth, that can happen a lot. So already the brute force generation of programs was showing us amazing stuff every day. And now these new, the latest generation of computers as well is showing us that a lot of the, our original ideas might have been less incorrect than we thought. So you should never have the feeling that you've learned something and that's it. You keep on revisiting stuff, and it's exhausting because you have to go on doing this. But on the other hand, that's how the world is, so you can't avoid it.
I find this quite fascinating that, you play the game and then you come home and you can observe it and replay it and all of that stuff. I wish we had something like this where, we do something, we have to make a decision, but there's no way to replay it and look how far it's going to go. You fire somebody, he's gone, you make a decision and it's done. You hire someone and you regret for the rest of your life, right? So it's one of those strange things that, it'd be good to have computers tell us as well, in terms of the simulation of what decisions would make and how would they, play along.
You might get your wish, actually.
Yeah, I know.
Because I think at some point it's just a question of, first of all, seeing what the computer does in that situation. Even if it doesn't answer all your questions, it may point out one or two mistakes. And over a period, this information drips in. I understand that the world of business is much less predictable than chess, because chess is actually a very rule-based, concise game where all the information is on the table. Real life is very different, so it may be a while, but...
Yeah, because, one of the, I think the big, if you talk to most CEOs or other people, I think, we are making daily calls, whether it's on a sales call or whether you're making hiring decisions. And sometimes you just don't know, and you're making them, you say you have science, but you're mostly operating on the seat of your pants. And then you don't always know if it's going to work out. So it's always a tricky thing. So I'm really hoping that, the next Alpha Zero or whatever can solve some of these problems as well. Let's take some questions from the group on the floor. I think several of you have questions to ask. So there are some mics that are around, but if you raise your hand, stand up and maybe say who you are and then ask the question. There are lots of them. But ask a question and be crisp. Okay, let's start with the one who has the mic.
Hi, myself Sandeep Ganekar. So my question is, what the life lessons do you think we can take from the beautiful game chess?
Well, I would say that you don't really get very interesting work done unless you're really focusing. So there's a lot of work I can do without concentrating a lot. But the deepest solutions, the most hidden ones, I find only after I've really begun to focus, and only after and this, I don't mean focus as in just a few minutes. Sometimes I'll look at a problem, then I'll go away, I'll look at a problem again, go away. Then 3 days later, suddenly something pops in my head. And then a week later, I may think, okay, a few ideas have come in my head, let me really think about this. So even knowledge comes in steps, and you almost build up to being able to learn something. But the best work happens when you really focus on something. And the other two I mentioned. So decisions are best made in a calm frame of mind. So you should consciously do whatever you can to maximize that. Though you should not underestimate the power of your emotions, but you know, whatever you can do to improve that. And that in the end, everything comes through persistence. You put in the hours, you'll get the results.
Thanks for putting that plug for persistence. But one question relating to some of the things you just mentioned is that, you know, focus and addiction. You know, in this kind of world, you can be on the internet forever, and you'll always find somebody to play with, and there's always a game to go. When do you stop?
You know, that's also a kind of unstructured way of learning. I find that very often when my brain isn't working anymore and I'm unable to think of anything new or interesting. So I do it externally. I switch on in a computer and just see what it says, and sometimes it will say something interesting. And then I can feel my brain react, it's getting excited. And so it thinks, oh, this thing is new, I didn't recognize it, let me try to figure it out. Or if you play on the internet, your opponent might do something interesting, and suddenly again. So very often the brain isn't tired, it's bored. It's more often bored than tired. And if anything you can do that gets it excited again, I think one of the healthiest things you can do to stay active is to be curious. So I'm not against whatever people find enjoyable as long as it gets the juices flowing again. But I mean,
Couldn't you get addicted to something? I mean, it's a great high that you keep going at it, but
definitely
should there be a way
definitely
to control yourselves and say, man, I need to go sleep sometime?
Definitely. In fact, I would say also, first of all, you need a good amount of sleep. If you're not getting 8 hours a day, that's bad news. Second, there's no amount of, you can't continuously do this. You need to take a walk sometimes. No devices, no nothing. You need to take a walk or do something physical. So you need to switch off as well. And I don't just mean on a daily basis, 1 hour a day. Sometimes you need to disconnect from whatever you do for 3 weeks or 4 weeks. I don't know, go on a holiday, whatever it is you do. But you need to do that. I mean, there are built-in things in life. You spend time with your family, you meet up friends. There are ways of disconnecting that are just built in. That's all very helpful in the long term. And it's probably good to keep some discipline with devices. But in short doses, everything's fine.
There's some more questions, I think. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those insights. My name is Shabazz. My question is, what are some of the common personality traits that you have observed while competing with one of the many best minds out of the world?
I would say that the chess world is big enough that you get all the common personality traits. But with chess, you can always say that there's a tendency to become self-absorbed. Because chess is again a world in which it's very easy to lose yourself. So that's one trait that pops up often. Besides that, chess players have this way of let's say approaching a problem. Just immediately think what can go wrong, what are the consequences, and that's a nice trait. But I would say that the traits you see in chess are not that different from any other walk of life. Perhaps this is the only area where it kind of stands out, which is that you get self-absorbed. But there are a couple of other fields as well. People at university sometimes they're really lost in their discipline, and they can become. But that's maybe just one trait that is unique.
I think someone has a mic. You have a mic, yeah. Okay, so those who have the mic are the ones who are going to get to ask the questions.
Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Good evening, Anand sirs. To both of you. Good evening. My question is in two parts. What was the iconic games of yours where you felt like in castling you could be shifted as an opponent instead of him and you be there? Iconic games of yours. Like in castling you do in a chess. You felt you were other side, he made a better move. Which iconic games you made? And second, how you identify in a person that he could be a potential chess player? What are the traits of things which he or she shows could be potential chess player?
Okay, of course, there are games I've played where my opponent really impressed me, or he did something that I find quite impressive. Equally, I've also played games where I think afterwards, did I do that? Because I surprised myself. For examples, very often it'll happen with Aronya, because he has an unusual style. And I guess most of the greats impress you in one way or the other. So Kramnik, Kasparov, Karpov, Carlsen, so the usual suspects. I don't know of some trait which marks out a chess player at a young age, except that they are playing chess, and if some of their moves are very impressive, and I see a sort of creative thinking process, if they find moves that are not obvious, then you think, okay, there could be something there. But that's more about talent than whether they're a chess player in the first place.
Yeah, there's some questions here.
Yeah, hi, Santosh Kotnis here. And question is, as 2013, this World Championship happened, not a favorable result for you. And then I remember after 6 months or so, you did remarkably well in London. So the question is, I think in day-to-day life, we go a lot of debacles like this. We see a lot of failures. So I wanted to understand your perspective, since chess is being purely a mental game. So how you bounce back generally? I mean, I think it's a life question rather than a chess question, but I wanted to understand your perspective.
Well, if there was a process to bounce back, I would do it sooner. So all I know is there are things that I can do that make it more likely. And quite often, I find that my best comebacks come when I least expect them. When I've given up and I'm almost fatalistic, and which happened in Hunty Mansis, for instance, or Riyadh 2 years back. You just think, I'm just going to go here for fun, because I don't see any way out of this for a while. And suddenly, things go unbelievably well, and you can't explain. I'd love to recreate them more often, but it's really unpredictable. If in the short term, I think experimenting is very good, simply because if whatever you're currently doing isn't working, it's an excellent time to try new things. If that doesn't fix the problem, then you try to go over your games, work on stuff like that. If even that doesn't work, or in fact nothing works, then sometimes just taking 1 or 2 months off is very good. I mean, it usually works for me. A long break from chess, when things are going badly, is often very nice. Equally, when things are going well, a long break is, you don't want to make it too long. But when things are going badly, it has often worked very well for me.
This is Arun.
Yeah, you are audible actually.
Yeah, so I read in an interview where Aruna said that she challenged you to an entirely new ground. That is, she challenged you to learn salsa with her. So while you were being on the mental game, how was your experience learning an entirely physical thing, and who among two of you turned out to be a better dancer?
I think you know the answer to that one already, but I would defend myself by saying that she was a dancer even before we got married. So,
You never win against your wife. So she's always
yeah, and it was not a competition. Actually, it was not a competition at all because I was out of step with her in the class. I mean, I found it very difficult to follow step 1, 2, 3, 4 and be in sync with her. So very soon I was doing something different from the rest of the group, and I lasted exactly 2 classes. So my salsa career was very short.
Anand, first of all, great opportunity. I would like to thank Anand and the rest of the team here to bring you here to Pune. Hope you keep coming more often. I was just going to go back to the discussion that Anand had just started about the brute force method that won out in '97, and since then all the changes that have happened because of machine learning. We keep hearing how chess, because of its fixed set of rules, originally it was easy in the 80s, as you said, then in the 90s because of brute force, and now it's easy for computers to pick up. We hear about how games like Go are significantly more difficult. So I was thinking, is there something that you are thinking of, or if not, would you think of creating something like a chess plus, which could be a lot more unstructured, some of the things that you were talking about some time back, so that it will make it progressively more difficult for computers to crack. I mean, chess is 1500 plus year old already now. So is it time to not just do small tweaks, but come up with something different?
Well, there was, in the early chess discussions, there was this question whether computers should have opening books or not. Because the problem is they retain their opening books in their memory, which means perfectly. And we are forced to rely on our memory, which is imperfect. And so whether this constituted an advantage or a disadvantage. Very early days, you didn't give them an opening book, the humans would kill them in the opening itself. But you gave them an opening book, and often it was too much of an obstacle once they had reached a certain level. Now it's irrelevant. It doesn't matter whether you give them opening book or not. Because you need to make enough good moves, and we make a mistake sooner or later. Then, actually a close friend of mine tried to revive Chess 960, an organizer in Germany who many of his events I've played, a man called Schmidt. He started having a series of 960 tournaments. And what that revealed was the stage was reset for both humans and computers. So we had an opening book, which was a new version of the game, like you pointed out, and the computers had no thing. And then the computers were killing us. So, because it turned out, even though our memory isn't perfect, we rely on having seen these patterns before. So if you change a game radically, it's very hard to think of a new game that we will be so good at that computers will be bad at. I suspect if we try to weaken the computers, we will weaken ourselves as well. So I don't know. I don't particularly have plans in the direction. I thought Go was going to save us for a long time. But then suddenly that fell. And in fact, we're in a nice place in chess now because long ago chess players gave up their ego about losing to computers. And now it's just about seeing how deep chess is and and chess seems to be infinitely rich, much deeper than we had suspected, let's say 20 years ago. So that's enjoyable enough.
I'm going to take just 2 more questions now. Yeah, go ahead.
For physical matches, they do physical exercises. So you believe in physical and mental exercises just before your matches?
Not just before, but I do quite a lot of, I do some physical training before a tournament, mainly to build up my stamina. And during tournaments, I might do whatever I can do to release my tension. So literally when you're very tense or after long games, it'll be very hard to sleep in that state, so it's good to do something that helps you get back to a normal state so that you can get a good night's sleep, and then the next day you're ready to do that again. So there's quite a lot of stuff I do before and during tournaments, but and I've heard that in physical sports they do the opposite. That sometimes I've heard a lot of footballers say they play chess to relax. So it seems to work in both directions.
Hello.
Yeah, let's get the lady.
Thank you, sir. Good evening. I'm Madhura. You mentioned that unlearning some things is as important as learning new things. But what happens is we are so attached to a particular way of playing or doing things that it's really difficult to unlearn. Or we need to unlearn, but we don't really want to unlearn. So what's your approach? How do you go about it?
Well, if as long as my understanding of a position is evolving, so if I was convinced there was a certain way to do things and now there's a better method, or there were a lot more details than I was aware of, so it's more nuanced, all that is fine. But where it's very important to really unlearn it are your prejudices, your biases. For instance, very early in my life, in my career, I would have developed very strong opinions about certain positions based on some painful defeat or thing. And these things sometimes just stick in your head. You don't even realize it, but you have just very strong aesthetic preferences. So there are positions I head for, the positions I reject at once. And nowadays it turns out that almost all positions have so much complexity hidden that you have to learn it. But for me then it's doubly hard in these positions, because I first have to stop rejecting that at the beginning, and only then I can start understanding what's going on. So it's more on the level of biases. In the other thing, it's easier. It's just your understanding of a thing evolves. You understand that something is deeper. There are more details. You have to be more precise, and that I actually enjoy. It's these aesthetic preferences that I have, and the strong sense to play a certain move, to reject it. That I find harder.
Okay, I think just last couple of things now. You've been a legend, clearly you have achieved pretty much most of the goals that you had probably set up early. What's next for you, Vishy? Where do you go from here?
Well, I feel in a way in a good place, because while there are many interesting things I want to do and goals I want to have, I don't feel desperate to do something. In the same way that once upon a time I would have felt that my life was incomplete if I hadn't become a world champion or something like that. Nowadays I'm more relaxed. I feel like I can play the game with much less pressure. I mean, I can approach a similar goal with much less pressure. It would be nice if I get it, but it's not like my life depends on it.
So are there other things you're looking at where you want to make an impact?
Yes, I will definitely do things around, a lot of things around chess. I also want to have, let's say, life goals, so I want to travel more, especially to places where I went to tournaments and never had the time to see anything. But also, I'd be happy with a fairly relaxed pace of life where you just good friends, good company, spend time with the family. So there's a lot of competing goals, if you like, and I feel as long as I get around to all of them in some order, that's great. So I feel much less pressure or obligation, if you like.
Thanks. I think you've closed 2018 well. I think you've already signed up for the World Tour for 2019, and clearly when you have been relaxed and you chill about it, you seem to do better. So I think we want to wish you all the very best for 2019. Perhaps there's another World Championship in you which you would love to see again. And I really want to wish you all the very best, and thank you for coming here.